everyone, this is Kassi with LDRS Creative. Today we're going to be doing some loose, no-line watercolor featuring a stamped image. Let's take a look at the things we're going to need for this project. I'm going to be using the Whispering Meadow stamp set from LDRS Creative. I'm also using some cotton watercolor paper. For my ink, I will be using Alloy from LDRS Creative. I've also chosen 3 watercolors, Mineral Pink and Autumn Green. Those are both Roman Schmal colors. And then Magic Wizard by Rockwell. Now you can use whatever paints and colors you want for this. I have 3 watercolor brushes, a paper towel, and some clean water just off camera. Alright, let's go ahead and get started. Whenever I'm stamping on watercolor paper, I prefer to use a MISTI so I can stamp more than once if I need to. So I'm going to place my paper in the bottom corner, and then I'm going to use this large flower stamp from the Whispering Meadow stamp set. And you can put it wherever you want it on your page. Pick it up with the lid of your MISTI. If it's a new stamp, you're going to want to condition it by just rubbing your fingers over the surface, and then ink it up with some Alloy ink. Now this is a fairly light ink. If you want to go even lighter, you can go with Fairy Dust, that's lighter than Alloy. If you want to see the lines, you can obviously stamp with a darker color like Raven. Here you can see the lines, sort of. It's hard with my glaring light, so I'm going to change my lighting so you can see the lines better. I have heat set this and taped this to a watercolor board. I like to use 2 watercolor brushes when I'm painting so I don't have to rinse out my brush as much. My black one will have the color and the red one will have just clean water on it. We're going to start with our petal color. For me, this is Mineral Pink. We're going to put the darkest color right at the base of the petals up close near the center and then use water to pull the color down. I'm going to load up my brush. A little bit more water, and then load that brush up. You want a fairly thick consistency of paint. And we're going to add that dark color in just little bits right up at the base of that petal, right near the center of the flower. Then switching brushes to the clean water brush, I'm going to pull that color down towards the edge of the petal. You want to leave that darkest color up by the center of the flower and fade that color out to a lighter color at the very edges of the petal. You're going to repeat the same process for each one of the petals. Make sure that you are never working next to a wet petal or your colors are going to bleed together. While you're doing this, keep in mind that this is supposed to be loose. It's not supposed to be perfect. So if you miss little areas, if you leave white of the paper in some areas, if you go over the line, it doesn't matter. It's just a loose watercolor and it will be fine. I've also found that with this looser watercolor style, the less you fuss and try and control it, the better it will look, especially on this first layer. If there are areas that you don't really like this bloom right here, I don't love that, we can go back and fix that after the petal has dried. But let it dry and see what happens. All right, I'm going to skip down to this other flower and continue doing the same thing. If you do happen to get too much paint or too much water on a petal, you can always dab it off with a paper towel. Some paints are going to stain more than others, but you should be able to lighten your color at least. I would like to mention that the first petal that you watched me paint was done in real time, so that is the speed that I typically paint at. The rest of these petals have been sped up just so that the video doesn't go too long and you don't get bored of watching me paint. If you are painting along with me, feel free to slow the video down or to pause to catch up whenever you need to. While there aren't a lot of overlapping petals on this particular image, when you do come across a petal that is overlapping, you want to add some deeper color in the shadow areas. So where the petal overlaps along that line, you're going to add a deeper color. So that back petal was pretty dark because it's on the other side of the flower. And I'm taking some dark color along that one side of this petal because it is underneath the other petal. At this point, I feel like my flowers are looking a bit wonky, but that's okay. It's just the normal part of watercolors at this stage. They tend to look a little bit weird. Just keep going, trust the process. It starts looking better once you start adding in more details and you get the other elements of the painting colored in. At this point, I am finishing up my petals, or at least I think I am. I did notice that I missed a petal, but it's okay. I do fix that in a few minutes. But when your petals are dry, you can start adding in little bits of detail. You don't want to outline the petal or anything, just add in little flicks of color near the base of the petal, and sometimes I like to do it near the tip, then soften them out with that water. On this second layer, you can add more detail if you want a more realistic look. I'm keeping this flower pretty loose and beginner friendly, so I'm just adding enough detail to give the flower form and to keep it visually interesting. But I'm not overthinking it, I'm just kind of adding in some flecks of dark color here and there. For our flower centers, I am using a fabulous color by Rockwell called Magic Wizard. It is a granulating, color separating color that goes on kind of brown, but has a yellow undertone that stains your paper. So you get a really cool, really easy effect for your flower centers, but you can do this with other colors as well. All right, let's go ahead and zoom you in. I'm gonna load up my brush, and then I'm going to just scribble this paint on in small circles and C shapes. It's really just scribbles, and I'm leaving a lot of white space in there. This will give it a visual texture, which I really love for centers of flowers. Then once that is painted in, and before it dries, you're going to take a paper towel and dab off part of it. This will give you a naturally lighter spot where you dabbed it off and fade into the dark colors towards your petals. So go ahead and do that again on my second flower. You do need to work fairly quickly for this. The paper dries fairly fast, and the paint still needs to be wet when you dab it off with the paper towel. I love the effect, and it's so simple. All right, moving on to those other smaller flowers that are in this little bouquet. I'm going to use the same color that I used for my flower centers. I'm just going to water it down. I'm just tapping this in. I'm not brushing it. I'm just doing little polka dots and connecting them in various places. And then I will tap that off with a paper towel. This is going to give me a very light yellow. And then I will go in with some darker paint, that same color, just a thicker consistency, and add in little details using a very fine brush. Because this is a loose style, I'm really not trying to go around each one of those little circles. I'm just letting the brush dance across the page, adding in some darks and some lights, and then tapping that off. And it's at this point that I realized that I missed a petal. So we're going to go back in and paint that petal. Now that we for real have all of our petals colored, we're going to add in our leaves. I'm using two colors, so I have my green, my autumn green, and mineral pink. Now I like to add in just a little bit of the color from my flowers into my leaves. It gives some visual interest as well as some color harmony. My black brush will be the green, this brown brush will be my water, and this tiny little brush, that will be my pink. Now you're going to be working wet in wet, so you need to work fairly quickly. It's one of the reasons I like having 3 brushes going for this. So I am loading up my green, and I am putting my darkest color underneath the leaf on this one, and at the base of the leaf, and then softening that color out using the clean water. Then I'm just going to tap in a tiny bit of pink. Not a lot, just a little. I like to do it at the tip of the leaf and then in maybe one other place. And then let the water move the paint as it wants to. If you fuss too much with this, you are likely to make some muddy colors, and that's not what we're going for here. So just tap in a little bit of that pink into your wet green and let it move how it wants. Just like with our petals, we're going to just keep repeating the same process for all of our leaves. For the leaves that are folded over, you want to make sure that you have some darker color along that fold line so that you can tell that it's a folded leaf. Now some of these leaves are very, very small, so you might want to get a small paintbrush to do them. On these really tiny little leaves, I didn't really add in much pink because there just was too little space for that. Here I am adding in some dark in that little curled spot. Make sure that you are letting that first spot dry before adding in the paint next to it. Again, we don't want to paint right next to a wet spot. Now the stems are so thin, I am switching to my very tiny brush to do the stems, and I am just going to go ahead with that green and just draw in all of those stem lines. The really small brushes don't hold as much paint or water as the larger brushes, so you will see me dipping back into my paint more frequently to pick up more color. On those yellow flowers, I'm just kind of doing a dashed line up through it where the stem is just peeking through some of those clustered little flowers. And at this point, you can be done if you want. I like to add a little bit of splatter to a lot of my watercolors. To do that, I am simply going to get a palette and mix up some fairly watery paint. You want a fair amount of water in that paint. Then you can tap that brush against another brush and it will fling color across your page. This is a bit uncontrolled and I know some people don't like it, so if you don't like the speckles, you can skip this step. To finish off this card, I am going to just doodle a black line, just black border around the edge of the card. I'm not going for perfection here. I'm going to add some scribbles in along the line just to kind of add to that loose handmade look. For my sentiment, I'm going to pop this back in my Misty and choose one of the sentiments from the Whispering Meadow stamp set. I think I'm going to go with the hello. Fits nicely right in there. So I will get that lined up, and then I will ink that up with some Raven ink. Now my Raven ink pad is a little bit dry. I need to re-ink it, so I'm going to have to stamp this twice, which is the beauty of having it in a Misty. At this point, it is ready to add to an A2 top folding card base. So I'm just going to use a little bit of adhesive and attach it. And here is our finished card. I hope this inspires you to pull out those watercolors and give it a try. If you do, be sure to share with us on the LDRS Creative Facebook page, as well as Instagram, and tag me as well so that I can see your beautiful creations. I always love seeing what other people are doing. I hope you have a wonderfully creative day, and we'll see you soon.